Psalm 34:8 says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him." That's a great psalm. And the Around the World semester really kind of rests on that idea, on that command, to taste and see that the Lord is good. One of the things we've tried to build into the program is an opportunity for students to go out and see what God is doing in the world. Obviously, God is active here, right here in Irvine, on this campus. And I've been blessed by his presence and by saints and good friends here that have blessed me. But it's really quite amazing to travel abroad and to see God active in very different ways in different cultures all around the world. And so that's one way that I think our Around the World students have been able to taste and see. And as have I and my wife Erica and our two kids, Naomi and Sheffield, and our oldest Jack is now at Baylor. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that word on this campus, but nonetheless, he's at another university, much, much inferior to ours. So during our 5-month trip, and this trip runs every couple of years, and we go for 5 months. It's a full academic semester. We travel, and we serve, and we learn, and we see the goodness of God all around the world. So I'm the director of the program. The logistics coordinator is a real handsome fellow named Alex Lang, very talented at logistics. And my wife, Erica, serves as a volunteer coordinator, and I couldn't even begin to list the number of things that Erica does. The trip would never happen without her agency and wisdom. So we have a pretty small, tight leadership group, but so far it's been working pretty well. So the mission of the program, challenging students through global studies, cultural immersion, and Christ-centered service. Concordia University Irvine's missional Around the World semester creates an academic learning community engaging foundational issues in literature, history, linguistics, and theology. That's a mouthful, but it's a beautiful mission statement that I did not write. I wrote that. Well, I actually helped Adam Lee and Tim Preuss put that together, but they put the wording together, and I love all the things that it talks about. This idea that we are an academic learning community, but we're also a worshiping community, which makes it a wonderful place and a wonderful thing to travel with, this worshiping community. We engage literature, history, linguistics, theology, as Dr. Kargas mentioned. Expert professors fly in. We meet great hosts who know so much about different fields in their areas. And so it becomes a really wonderful event. The genesis of the program, in 2009, my friend Adam Lee, he was a former English professor here, wonderful friend. We sat down at lunch to talk about a couple of summer trips that he had run in prior summers, one to India and one to Africa. I think they're about 5 to 6 weeks each. I could be wrong on that. But I noticed that those programs had caught a fire. They caught fire on our campus, and there was a buzz happening. It really felt that God was at work in some unique new ways through these 2 summer programs that he ran. And so I sat down and I said, "Hey, man, I want a piece of this. What's happening? This sounds awesome." People are talking about Africa. They're talking about India. And we haven't done a whole lot of missional trips internationally here since I've been here. And so we started talking, and it was just an awesome lunch. It'll go down in my life as one of the great lunches of my life. And by the end, we started kind of brainstorming, how can we do this in a normal academic semester? And so we started talking about different ideas, and different ideas came up. And next thing you know, we've kind of had a skeletal framework of classes, of projects, a general vision. And then just on a whim, we sent an email up to the provost. At the time, it was Mary Scott. And it was a Friday afternoon. And sent an email to her. I think it was like 1 o'clock. Before 4, I came back from my classes. I checked my email before I left for home. Checked to my email, and she'd responded. "Sounds good. Go for it." Wow, okay. I'm not sure I want to do it, but it's just an idea. But now she's telling me to do it. So anyway, that fast forward a ways, and when we show up at our first information event a few weeks, maybe a month later, and there's flyers on the table announcing that we're going to be leading this trip. And I hadn't committed to it at all. And we had 2 small children. Naomi was 6, Jack was 9. Sheffield was still in heaven with the angels, floating somewhere. Is that how it works? I'm not sure. We can talk about that later. I need some advice on that. Anyway, so Sheffield hadn't been born yet. So Erica looks at the flyer and she's like, "Wait, are we for sure doing that?" And our name is there, right? Led by Adam Lee and the Nortons. And so, well, yes, actually. And so we were unsure at first, but as the Lord led and as we kept praying, ended up being one of the best decisions of our lives. So this was in 2010. We set off on August 16th for our first stop, which was Argentina. And it was an amazing first stop, and it just kind of opened up the doors of this trip. But I'm telling you, that first several countries, I was mortified. And by the end, we were in Hong Kong airport, and I looked at Erica, and she says, "Can you believe it's over?" And I was like, "Yeah, I thought we were going to die on this trip. So I'm just happy to be alive and heading back home, because I just didn't think I would live through this. I couldn't picture living through this." I know, I probably shouldn't say that at the university, should I? But anyway, I've lived through 10 years of this now, so I guess it's all right. I love this idea. We were able to create a study and service trip that involves missions, evangelism, Bible teaching. We were able to create a really cool high-impact learning experience. That's what this is. It's high-impact learning. We read books in the places they were written. We study and learn history on location. I have 3 examples of just probably 3 of the great highlights of this trip for me over the last 10 years. First one, just last fall, yours truly over here, Dr. Kargis and his beautiful family, came out and visited us in Hungary and Austria. And he walked us through the history of the Habsburg Empire. As we were walking through Austria, he's got no notes. He just knows the place. He's been there. He's an expert on this history. And he's walking us through castles, different museums, landmarks, random landmarks. And he's just unveiling this history for us. And the city just opened up for the team. It was a really wonderful time. Another trip involved Professor Vesner, our theater professor, opening up in London, England, and taking the students to a Shakespeare theater and the Globe in London, and watching a play and having a whole series on Shakespeare. I was a little jealous of that, but I wasn't on that trip, so I couldn't whine about it too much. And then thirdly, this last spring, and actually the last 2, 2017 and 2019, Professor Middendorf came and visited us in Greece and in Israel and walked us through the Holy Land in the most amazing kind of biblical history tour. It was fantastic. And so those 3 stand out to me as what we had originally hoped to do, right? Learning on location, reading books in the place they were written, experiencing the history on the ground where it took place. An incredible interactive learning experience. The trip, as I mentioned, is about 17 weeks. It's a little longer than a semester. They always involve 10 countries, and we always circumnavigate the globe. Students take 2 world literature classes, 1 language class, 1 travel writing class, and a service learning practicum. After 10 years of running this program, I've discovered that I hold many roles on every trip. And you guys are familiar with this, right? This is vocation talk. But my vocations really kind of get a bit intense on this trip. And so let me just unpack that for you, because this is kind of what I write about in this memoir, this series of short stories. I am the team pastor, if you will, the team minister. I lead the prayers and the devotions. I help establish the worshiping community that we have and that we enjoy on our trip. That's my most important role. I love that one, and it's the most important thing I do, I think, on the whole trip, is as we pray together and draw the team together, we become a worshiping community. The second one, I'm the professor and guide, obviously. I'm the curriculum designer, which is part of being a professor on the trip, teaching, engaging, correcting, and encouraging the team of world travelers. I'm a husband on the trip, my wife. Now, that sounds a little silly. I'm also a dad on the trip. But if you can imagine, with all the kind of the strain and the stress and the uncertainty of moving from one place to another every 2 weeks, 10 to 15 different countries, all these different cultures, it's been a great challenge and a great shaping to work at being a husband and a dad on a trip like this. Being a husband and a dad, some of you here know, it requires quite a bit of thoughtfulness. And so Eric and I take date nights. A couple memorable ones are in a Turkish castle and in a former kind of bunker for the U.S. Army at the Hotel Oberoi, which is now a 5-star resort. Not quite the bunker anymore. As a dad, I have to take time to stop and listen and focus on my own kids. And I got a little dude over there who likes to talk about all kinds of cool stuff. That's all part of this trip for me. And it's wonderful, but it's very, very challenging, again, to manage these vocations. And finally, I'm a student and a volunteer, right, on this trip. Again, that sounds obvious, but one of the greatest parts of this trip is the opportunity to stand side by side with the students on the team and to break down, a big brick wall in Greece, and to spend hours upon end in a hospice center in India's Calcutta, working with the dying. Those moments of serving and being a student and volunteer on the trip, as that vocation, has really bonded me with the student teams over these years in ways that I'm just so thankful for. We've created lifelong friendships, and that's something that's just wonderful. As a student, in my role as student on the trip, a good professor is always learning. And any professor you have at Concordia will always tell you, they're the last to tell you, actually, that they know everything about their field. What they will tell you is they know where to find the knowledge and the information to get smarter and wiser. They know how to track research and put together good ideas. And so as a student on the trip, I get to learn right alongside the students. I get to model what a good student looks like. When professors like Dr. Kargas and others come, I'm taking notes right there in the class. I'm hungry to learn. When our hosts come and tell us their stories, I'm in the front row. I don't hog the front row, but I'm in there. I'm listening because I'm very interested. I want to learn. I want to experience this, and I want to grow. And so these different vocations are a blast to experience. I mentioned these vocational challenge and opportunities because 10 years of running this program has had a profound impact on my heart and on my mind. Learning to pastor the team has softened my heart in some powerful ways. Learning to guide the team of students as a professor and subject expert has shaped my intellect and allowed me to grow and learn as a scholar. Learning to be more intentional as a husband and as a dad on the trip has forced me to become more mindful of my wife and children, even when the stresses of leadership, travel, and culture shock swirl around me. Learning to be a student and a faithful volunteer has allowed me to get very close to teams I've led, forming bonds of friendship that will stand and last forever. So the program has launched over 65 different international adventures. We've touched 5 of the world's 7 continents and 45 different countries. We've circled the earth 6 different times, sometimes east to west, sometimes west to east. So when I returned from the first trip in 2010, I started speaking at various engagements, schools, churches, and so forth, and it's always fun to talk about the trip. But this book of memoirs, this book of stories here that I've written, comes out of those 10 years of storytelling. And so I want to share just a couple with you guys today, if I may, give you a little feel for what this book is going to look like. And I think some of these stories will kind of help flesh out some of what it is to be on the Around the World semester. Shenzhen, China, 2010. Our arrival into China involved many mixed emotions. The power and the danger, the historic oppression, and the secretive nature of China's foreign policy made me feel that I was stepping behind a veil. I wondered if our students would be welcomed and treated kindly. I wondered if my family would be watched and carefully guided by our host, or if we would be allowed the freedom to explore. I was also concerned about freedoms we would be offered to worship as a team, as this was a central part of our identity. Having been on the road for over 4 months, we had been sustained by prayer and worship as a traveling family. I wondered if our host would pressure us to refrain from these vital team practices. We landed in Hong Kong. From there, we traveled to our host city, Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a relatively new city in China, established in 1979, but it has more than 6,000 years of history. Historical records dating from 1410 bear the name Shenzhen, which means that the city may have been established as early as the Ming Dynasty. Our team enjoyed visiting a few restored cultural sites, including the Nantou Ancient City, the Dapeng Fortress. Many of the relics at these sites were over 600 years old. The Hakka people migrated to the city in the 18th century, and they're part of recent indigenous populations in Shenzhen. The city is technologically advanced, and its infrastructure reminds us of Orange County and parts of San Diego. Any sense that we were in a place of oppression or danger fell away when we met our hosts. These men and women were generous with their time and generous with their resources. Li Na, that's a name I made up. This lady would probably be in trouble for the amount of help and freedom she gave us, and so I've changed a few names in these stories to protect our friends. Li Na was an administrator at one of the schools where we worked. She adopted our family, and she looked after us with a sweet diligence. At the beginning of our first week in China, she pulled me aside. Dr. Norton, I would like to talk to you about your schedule for the week. On any of the nights you are not having a team meeting or doing other business, my family and I would like to take you to dinner. I could not have understood the depths of Chinese hospitality if I had not experienced it. Li Na followed up with me every afternoon. Have your plans changed for tonight? If so, we would love to take your family to our favorite restaurant. On our fourth night, we had our first dinner with Li Na and her husband Chen and their teenage daughter. They took us to a restaurant with a, quote, very special menu. That always makes me a little nervous when we hear about a very special menu. Kind of want just the normal menu, but that's fine. The food was prepared by chefs from Mr. Chen's hometown. We followed Li Na and Chen to the back of the restaurant, up a private staircase, and into a small room next to the kitchen. Very special. Li Na explained, my husband is very good friends with the owner. They have brought in a very special meal for us tonight. I was excited, but also nervous. I love the Chinese cuisine, and I enjoyed trying very different kinds of food, no matter how exotic or the preparation. I was worried about the two very hungry children, however, at my side. Jack and Naomi have been troopers all through this trip, but we usually had a few options. Li Na and Chen ordered one special meal for all of us. Chen spoke limited English, but he tried to communicate directly as much as possible. His first question came to me as we sat down. You like drink? Strong drink? I said, yes, pointing to my flexed bicep. I love a strong, muscular drink. Li Na laughed, but Chen did not understand it immediately. He leaned over to her for a translation, and his face lit up in delight. He threw his head back and exploded with laughter. He ordered a special rice whiskey that was very, very muscular, but also very tasty. The whiskey served as an excellent pairing with the main course. Our first course was a salty soup that we all enjoyed. There were pieces of pork and soup and some thick noodles and a flavorful broth. The main course came in with a flourish, and this is where I got a little nervous. A massive wicker basket was carried into the room by two attendants. The men poured a few different oils and scattered spices onto a massive mound of what looked like a diced meat, all directed by Chen, who stood beside them. Li Na explained, the meat in the basket is raw fish, a special fish from east of the Guangdong province. The dish is popular with Hakanese people like my husband. It is prepared with a special oil and these spices. It is always presented in a woven basket, and we eat it with chopstick and special spoons, like these. She held up the special spoon, which we had used to eat our soup with. My stomach dropped. Raw fish pieces, spices, and an assortment of oils. I was certain that my kids would soon break into tears. How would we explain? I hid these feelings behind a smile, a friendly nod, trying to allow enthusiasm to cover my anxiety. I turned to Erica, and she was smiling and nodding, too clearly disturbed and worried. The attendants soon departed, and Chen demonstrated the eating technique. I was the first to jump in, hoping my enthusiasm would encourage the children. Believe me, Naomi's 16 now, but she was 6 at the time, so younger than that little dude right there. And so my nervousness, you can imagine. I picked up a few pieces of fish with my chopsticks, placed them on my spoon, and then topped the spoon with a peanut and a few spices. It was fantastic. The flavor was amazing. Before I could say anything, I looked down, and Naomi was loading up her first spoonful. She and Jack ended up loving the meal, and they talked about it for months afterward. I'll never forget looking down the table at Naomi, her little arm stretched out over the wicker basket, chopsticks extended, a huge smile. I love this. Li Na and Chen loved watching Jack and Naomi enjoy that meal. Chen ordered another round of drinks, and we were soon engrossed in a fun conversation about family and culture. As we emptied the basket, Chen ordered another batch and another round of whiskey. He stood up from his chair suddenly, lifted his glass, and said, I want to get drunk with you tonight, my friend. Another awkward feeling ran through my body. I tried to think of what to say. Oh, boy. I stood and tapped my glass to his. To a great night and to new friends, I said. Chen smiled and drained 3 ounces of the whiskey. Giant cups of whiskey. I took a sip of mine, and Li Na chimed in. Sorry. It is our custom to empty the glass in a toast, she said. I tipped my glass back. When we sat back down, our glasses were refilled to the brim. I thanked Chen, but I explained. You are a wonderful host, but unfortunately, I cannot get drunk. My team of students is counting on me to lead them through a series of lectures in the morning. Chen seemed to understand, but he stood up again, extended his glass, and said, I want to get drunk with you tonight. After a little more explaining and a few more translations from Li Na, he said, "You are a fine American man. I am happy to be your friend, and I'm happy to have a fine American friend." I stood, toasted his glass, but I did not swig those contents. He looked at my glass with concern and whispered to Li Na. She responded to him in a whisper, and he smiled. "A very responsible, honorable American friend," he said. When we left the restaurant that night, Chen ordered two full boxes of the rice whiskey. "I would like you to take these bottles as a gift," he said. With a box of rice whiskey under each arm, I leaned toward Li Na to accept a warm hug. In a quiet tone, she said, "I want your team to be able to pray and to read your Bibles as you stay here. Feel free to lower the curtains in your team room at the school. You can sing or pray as much as you like. You are very welcome here." Li Na's quiet tone made it clear that her permissions may not have been entirely legal or supported by her public school district, but I was overwhelmed by her kindness. She and Chen wanted to walk us back to our hotel, but we insisted we could manage the 2-block distance by ourselves. This couple embraced us with an overwhelming hospitality, and their care for us continued until our very last moments in the city. While China still bore a great sense of mystery to me at the end of our adventure, like two bright threads in a complex tapestry, compassion and generosity now took a central place in our memory of this country. So that was our final country in 2010. And that memory has always stuck with us. Actually, funny enough, we went to, my wife has my wife's parents, my in-laws have a home in Arrowhead. So we returned from that trip on December 19th, and shortly after Christmas, we went up to Arrowhead. Well, Erica got an email from Li Na, on the 23rd or something like that. No, it was after Christmas, so it would have been the 1st of January. And the email said, "Erica, I see that it's very cold where you are. Do the children have jackets, or can I send them some?" So just the hospitality and the kindness and the warmth. It was just a beautiful moment, a complex moment, right? Because China is our quote-unquote, enemy, I guess, in a political realm, which sounds so stupid to say. And so we see this, we have our perspectives often tainted by the media and by the news and by political affairs, right? So I know there's some very serious things happening in the world, but the fact of the matter is, in China, we met some friends who cared for us like I've never been cared for before. And as a family, we were so loved and drawn in. How was my time? You want more? Okay. Nepal, 2014. When you use a squatty potty here in Nepal, you have to pull up your skirt, get your balance secure, and drop all the way down. You guys know what a squatty potty is? Our missionary host, this very comical and very practical advice came from our female Nepali host. And it had all of us bent over in laughter. I'm going to call her Sandra Baltimore. Again, she and her husband are doing illegal work in Nepal, and they would be in big trouble if they somehow got out, of course. I know the vast audience here probably won't say anything, but just in case. These are wonderful people. Sandra Baltimore is barely 5 feet tall, but her personality and her loving, caring attitude makes her seem as big as an NBA superstar. She and her husband, Robert, met while in the States, but Sandra grew up in Argentina and Robert in Ohio. The two started dreaming about mission work before marriage, and after years of praying, they realized God was calling them to Nepal. The Baltimores are called first contact missionaries, meaning that they focus on taking the gospel to those who have never heard it. In Nepal, this means hiking for days and sometimes weeks into the Himalayan foothills. In addition to clothing on their backpacks, the Baltimores carry a projector and a copy of the Jesus film. As an amateur magician, Robert carries several ropes and other fun supplies that allow him to put on informal magic shows as well. These tricks always draw a crowd of children, and me too. But the tricks are also good enough to attract adults. Another of the gifts Robert shared with our team was his training as a wilderness emergency medical technician. Unbeknownst to us, this training became very important during our time. His knowledge of the human body and his ability to diagnose a serious medical condition allowed us to get important and timely medical care for one of our students. It all happened quite unexpectedly when we were staying in a remote village in the foothills of the Himalayas. The Baltimores led our team to a place called Mamling, a village where they had established a church a few years before. The growing body of believers was holding an ordination service for a few new pastors, and the Baltimores made arrangements for our team to join them. The small village of Mamling was located in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. Get this, a 26-hour bus ride from our hotel in Kathmandu. And that wasn't a nice bus. That was a knee jammed in the back of the seat in front of you bus. I didn't have a very good attitude when I was in that bus. While the bus proved physically challenging for our team, this was light work for the Baltimores. They languished in the fact that we could sit peacefully on a bus instead of walking for days. Our bus ride turned into a four-wheeled adventure when we got within 10 miles of the village. The narrow mountain roads were bumpy, and it took special vehicles and a special set of driving skills to navigate them safely. At various points along this road to Mamling, the road provided only enough space for one vehicle. And just as Robert started to explain the problems that often happen when a car breaks down, we pulled up on a very long line of traffic. Robert jumped off the bus, waved for me to follow him. We walked along the side of the deeply grooved dirt road with a very steep cliff on the far side. I mentioned this is the Himalayas, right? The grooves in the road were at least 3 to 4 feet deep in certain sections, completely impassable, with even a good four-wheel drive vehicle and some serious ground clearance. We walked for about 500 yards when we saw the problem. A Jeep was stuck in one of the deep grooves, and its front axle had snapped. Robert talked to a few of the men surrounding the vehicle and gathered that while help was on the way, the road would be blocked for several hours. Note, we had already been on the road for 21 hours at this point. And I was very miserable. Because of his familiarity with this part of the country, Robert was not fazed by this news. He walked to the other side of the accident and found a large truck that was carrying 15 passengers. He arranged for that driver to trade vehicles with our driver, and within 45 minutes, we were back on the road to Mamling. I remember marveling at the ease with which Robert made all of these negotiations. God had gifted him with a personality that gained him a lot of favor with the Nepali men. It was amazing to see someone whom the Lord had clearly gifted for this work. He and Sandra continued to inspire us, but as we would soon discover, the real challenges had not even begun to rise. In addition to filling out seats at the ordination service, our team designed and led an English camp for the village school. It was a small K-12 school, and the principal was thrilled to have a team of Americans teaching his students English for a week. He had no problem with our use of Bible stories in the camp. We ended up using a vacation Bible school structure to teach the students English. Our accommodations in Mamling were particularly memorable. The ladies stayed in the church sanctuary, which Naomi described as being covered with spiders, giant spiders. The guys broke up into small groups and stayed in church members' homes. My family stayed in a barn that had been outfitted with 4 plywood beds. On our second night, I discovered that my nightstand was actually a large bucket of goat food with a piece of plywood on top. Despite the company of mice that scampered in and out of our little house, the room was warm and cozy, and our hosts were incredible. Thick hand-woven blankets provided plenty of cushion on our plank beds, and our host provided a pot of hot water for coffee and fresh squeezed goat milk. Fresh squeezed goat milk. Funny, I wrote that. I didn't realize I did that. I think that might be a typo. Fresh squeezed goat milk? I guess some's getting squeezed. For each every morning at daybreak. I'll never forget stepping out of the barn after our first night in Mamling. I had to duck out of the doorway. And when I straightened up, I was face to face with Mount Makalu, the 5th highest mountain in the world. As the crow flies, we were approximately 70 miles from Mount Makalu. Because of its immense size, stretching over 27,000 feet into the sky, it seemed like it was right on top of us. It is hard to describe what a mountain like this can do to the human spirit. I found myself in prayer each morning, wanting to sing to the Lord and to praise His glory as I stood beneath this giant mountain. Our English camp was packed with kids. At certain points during the week, I had to fill in at various stations just to help keep control of the massive group of campers. We told Bible stories, shared about Christ and His resurrection, taught about American culture, and played some fun games. While it was a challenge living in such a rural community and eating authentic Nepali foods, the team was in high spirits. I think we all knew this experience and these memories would stay with us forever. When a few of us developed some stomach issues, diarrhea is a pretty common challenge for travelers, I wasn't worried. From teat fresh milk, I wrote that, that's a little bit weird, to a nest fresh eggs. I didn't think I'd be reading this out loud. Saying teat squeezed milk sounds weird out loud, but anyway. And nest fresh eggs. I assumed our bodies would undergo some shock, right? It was when I saw Taylor, one of our teammates, doubled over in tears during my Nepali literature class that I grew concerned. Taylor was a fantastic traveler, tough, enthusiastic, and adventurous. She was really close to my daughter Naomi, and we all respected her ability to handle anything. Knowing that Robert was an EMT with a lot of medical experience, I planned to ask him to take a look at her. But before I brought it up, he had spotted the worrying signs. I'm concerned about Taylor's appendix, he told me after my class. After asking her about the pain, Robert was confident that we needed to get Taylor down the mountain and to a hospital as soon as possible. He snapped into action, ordering a 4-wheel taxi and fashioning a stretcher out of some long bamboo poles and a large tarp. We carried Taylor down the main road and sent her with Professor Lee to the hospital in Kathmandu. It turned out that although Taylor's appendix had ruptured, her appendix actually ruptured, her body formed a wall around it. The doctor in Kathmandu communicated with Taylor's doctor at home in the States and determined that the appendectomy could be safely postponed to the end of the semester. Taylor was adamant about staying on the trip. She was determined to finish the semester, to stay with the team, and to experience the full HW semester. This event in Nepal will forever be a testimony of God's goodness and faithfulness to me. From Robert and Sandra's insight and care for our team, and especially their ability to read Taylor and her needs, to God's miraculous protection of Taylor by walling off her appendix. That's a thing that happens to only a few people. These events are a beautiful and very personal reminder of God's continued grace and care. In 2019, we went back to Nepal and visited the Baltimores and had a wonderful time with them. We didn't do mambling again. I got a little gun-shy about being 26 hours from any kind of services, and with that whole thing, I didn't want to cheat death twice. Not that I did the first time, but somehow I just didn't feel prudent. So we didn't do the 26-hour bus ride to Manly the second time we went to Nepal. We had an incredible time in Kathmandu with an amazing pastor and his wife, and they're an awesome church team. So Nepal is a wonderful place. One more short one? How we doing? Yeah? You got energy for this? Okay. All right, this is from Jordan, 2010. I leaned down close to his cheek. Warm breath wheezed out of a small opening between his lips. An invisible weight pressed his face into the white pillow. I wanted to kiss his cheek, but the fear of waking him from healthy slumber kept my lips from touching. The fever had not lifted, but an hour of fitful whimpers stole energy from his eyelids. He had laid his hand on my face at midnight. I feel sick, Daddy. I unzipped my sleeping bag and cupped his cheek with my hand. Are you hot? He nodded. His eyes were full of tears, and his mouth had bent into a sharp frown. He sniffled in an effort to hold back a cry. A camel moaned a few feet from our tent. Our guide told us that the camels would make noise if coyotes entered the camp area. I heard the guide unzip his tent and walk toward the camels. I turned back to face Jack. Drink a little water, buddy. I pushed a sweep of hair out of his eyes. His hair clumped in sweaty strands on his forehead. I unscrewed the top from my water bottle and lifted it to his lips. He took it from me and drank. Our campsite was at the edge of the Wadi Rum, a massive desert in Jordan. We were traveling with a group of university students on a 4-month study abroad experience. I was leading the students with another professor, and between the two of us, we were teaching 5 classes. This camel riding adventure was billed as one of our trip highlights. Each student will ride their own camel through the Wadi Rum. Jack, my 9-year-old son, started to give in to the cry behind his eyes. His shoulders shook and he lowered his head. I pulled him onto my chest and lay back on my pillow. His damp hair rubbed against my chin. I whispered a prayer, covering his head with one of my hands. Please heal this boy, Father. Break the fever, please. Jack took a deep breath and continued to cry softly on my chest. Erica and Naomi, my wife and daughter, were asleep on the other side of our tent. I thought of waking Erica, but I knew she needed the sleep. If I woke her now, she would not sleep the rest of the night. She was organizing all of our adventures in Jordan, and we had a big day of travel ahead of us. Erica had not hesitated when I originally told her about this trip. 10 countries, 25 students, $27 a day. We will be camping, sleeping in youth hostels, riding in small vans, many hours in airplanes. Tears filled her eyes. I've been praying for something like this, she said, with more confidence than I did. When the university gave us the green light to plan the semester and recruit students, the interest list was fully populated in 3 days. We received phone calls and emails, many students bombarding our offices and wanting to apply. The details seemed endless, but a tall list of calls and reservations soon shrank. And at last, we were handing our bags to a ticketing agent at LAX. We boarded the first airplane on August 16th. We departed from Los Angeles en route to Argentina. After 2 weeks in Buenos Aires, we flew to Moscow. Another 2 weeks and then on to Turkey. We split 2 weeks in Turkey between Istanbul and Ankara, and then flew to Egypt. After a few days in a Bedouin camp at Mount Sinai and another few at a hostel beside the Red Sea, we traveled by land and then by ferry to Jordan. We were shuttled to the edge of the Wadi Rum Desert, where we boarded 4x4 trucks for a 45-minute trip over the sand to the first encampment. My wife, Erica, Jack 9, Naomi 6, and I were seated on top of the luggage in the bed of a 1980s-style Toyota Tacoma. We each found gaps between the luggage and lounged between an array of stars. I had never seen stars like that. Jack lifted his head up and looked at me. Am I going to die, Daddy? My stomach tightened at Jack's question. We were far from civilization, even farther from Western hospitals. I had little knowledge of and thus little confidence in Jordanian hospitals, and if the fever continued, I know we would be calling for an emergency evacuation. Our insurance carrier covered an emergency airlift from Jordan to Paris, where they had, quote-unquote, certified doctors. I raced through these details in my head, my mind even locating the insurance card in my stack of trip materials. 3 or 4 more of the camels groaned in unison. Erica crawled over to us and whispered, "What's wrong with Jack?" Erica rolled Jack back onto his sleeping bag and pressed her lips to his forehead and then to his cheeks. "He's hot," she whispered. She sat up and unzipped the bag of medicines that were at the foot of our sleeping bags. After she gave Jack a Tylenol, she curled up next to him. "Just try to sleep now, buddy. You'll be okay." In a few minutes, I heard Jack breathing heavily. Erica slipped over next to me and said, "It's a little bit scary being so far from everything, especially when the kids get sick." I agreed. But after we prayed, the fears seemed to fade, and we both fell asleep. And then in the morning, Jack looked great. His fever was gone, and he was very excited for the giant camel adventure ahead of us.
Any questions? I have one.
Yes.
Did the story of you almost touching Franz Ferdinand's car make it in there?
No, not yet, but I need to get that in there. We got in big trouble for that.
Almost.
Almost. But
you set off an alarm.
They came running. Yes. Alarm. People came running at us. Yeah. One really cool moment of allowing a 2-year-old. We had Sheffield was 2 when we took the trip in 2014. And we went to this really awesome, oh man, shoot, I'm forgetting that guy's name. One of the great leaders of Turkey throughout all the ages. They have a palace there, it's all redone, and there's just ropes galore everywhere, right? I was feeling a little rebellious. It's not very culturally sensitive. But we were standing, there was this beautiful bed that apparently this guy slept on, and it was just satin and gorgeous. And there's Sheffield, and he goes, "Can I go in?" He's a 2-year-old, right? "Can I go in there?" And I was like, "Yep." Of course, there's ropes, and so he didn't have to duck, though, because he's so short. He just walks right under the rope and goes and he lays down on this ancient bed. It was awesome. Erica's freaking out. She comes running over. "Oh, my gosh, she's going to get shot." And I was like, who's going to shoot a 2-year-old? This Turkish guard, very huge, very armed, very Uzi'd guard, came over, and he was like, "Hey, oh, that is cute." So he said to me, "That is cute." And he was like, he was torn. And I was like, oh, let me get him. Oh, wait. Said something to the guy next to him. In Turkish, I don't know what it was. It says like, cute kid probably, right? 3-4 minutes passed. I was just like laying, doing like snow angels on this bed. It was awesome. Yeah. So anyway, done lots of illegal things, but not always gotten in trouble. Favorite place I've ever been to.
For the recording, I'll put in the question. What's your favorite place you've been to?
Okay.
The question that's been posed.
It's interesting. I have lots of favorites, but what we normally do when we hear who asked that? What I normally say is like the one I've been thinking about recently, right? Like the one that I was craving lunch at for this afternoon. You know what I mean? And I have to say Athens, Greece. Yes, that's my. Yes. Oh, I just love it so much. So much. Partly because it's an amazing place with incredible food, beautiful people and culture and so forth. And then partly because our own Mike, Dr. Middendorf here came and unpacked it in a way that I feel like I understand it even deeper, an incredible spot. So I'd say Athens, Greece, today at least, is my favorite. Oh, yes.
What would you say is one thing that you've really gotten away each trip? Something that you feel like you learned every year?
Yeah, that's a great question. What is one thing that I feel like I've learned or a key takeaway from the trips? Well, there's a few, but one that keeps coming back, I think because we do quite a bit of service with the poor and some needy and often the sick too. And I've told stories about this in chapel at times. My experience in India kind of changed my life years ago in the Mother Teresa homes. I was invited to care for an older man, and I really didn't want to do it, to be honest with you. It's kind of embarrassing to admit it. But there was nobody else, so I had to. And as I ended up giving myself to that, I had this incredible epiphany that it is a great honor to be invited into someone else's suffering. It's a great honor to be invited into someone else's suffering, right? And it's an honor. It's a privilege. It's a really tender thing. And so I think that's a big takeaway for us. A lot of our hosts, we had these hosts in Mumbai in 2010. Pastor Christopher was so awesome. We had a pretty tight budget, and he called us in. And this was a church in the slums of Mumbai. It was pretty rough spot. He calls us in, Adam and I. And he says, guys, the ladies who've been making your food, they went over budget. And so we know you're on a tight budget. And so the whole community has come together to pitch in to cover your budget. I wanted to say, no. I wanted to say, hell no. Don't do that. Are you kidding me? I mean, looking around, these people can't afford that. I wanted to say all this, right? What I gotta say? I mean, I had tears in my eyes. I said, thank you. That's like one of the kindest gestures, right? These folks invited us into their homes, and they're very simple homes. And they're homes that involve some suffering because of that intense poverty. And then they doubled down by taking such good care of us and caring even for our budget, which is pretty amazing. So being invited into people's suffering, I'd say, is a big one.
All right, here's I got a couple from text.
Okay.
So which year was the most eventful or memorable as far as things that did not go to plan?
Oh, boy. Maybe 2019, when we thought we had it all figured out. Yeah, I had this awesome itinerary and a great plan, a great country plan, and all these really cool things. And, well, just one example, we were going to go to Vietnam, and I had an amazing host, all dialed up for us in Vietnam. I was super excited. We're going to split our time in Ho Chi Minh City, the south, and then we're going to go to Hanoi in the north, about halfway through. But both, we had great setup. Like 10 days before we arrive. I didn't get a call. I got an email, actually, but I'll do this anyway. Hey, there's no one around. We thought we could host you. Sorry. It was like about that brief. It was an email, so it was super fast. And I was like, oh, no. So we scrambled and tried to put things together. Ended up having a pretty awesome time in Vietnam, I would say. But that trip seemed like to keep kind of falling apart at different moments. It kept getting put back together, this team we had. Many of them are here. I mean, it's a tribute to them. I mean, they were incredibly strong. At one point, we were in, it was Hanoi, and it was just hot. Like, hot and wet. Like, so hot and wet, like, why even put on clothes? Like, you're that wet, right? Gnarly. And so one of our friends said, you know what you guys should do? You guys should go share the gospel with random people around the lake. And I was like, that sounds awkward. Yeah, let's do it. And so I got a few more details, best practices that she and her team had done, and I pitched it to these guys. And I think they were about as mortified as I was. And I was like, well, let's just go, try it, you know? What's the worst that can happen? We all get thrown in jail. No, that's not the worst. Totally legal. It's legal to do this, right? And so we go down there, and we ended up having some amazing conversations with these people, many, many different people. It was actually Vietnamese people, there were Chinese folks, there were tourists from all around, and we just had these incredible conversations with people, and several of them offered us opportunities to share our faith in Christ, which was pretty awesome. But that was kind of like slung together last second. So this last one, that was a doozy for sure. But awesome. Turned out great.
Another one from text. What were moments when you saw a student and thought, man, that's why we do this?
Oh, gosh. I love that. So many times. So many times. When I first started here at Concordia full-time, I was hired to be the tennis coach and an English professor, like a half contract each, which made it full contract. It was great. And I loved 5 years of coaching the tennis teams. But that's a different kind of student than the students that come here to study Scripture, to study for ministry, who want to go into teaching and who God has already called into ministry. That's a whole different kind of deal. So it was a shocker. I finished my last season as tennis coach in May of 2010. Several weeks later, we're on an airplane to Argentina. It's fast turnaround. I didn't know those students that well, but we landed. And we hit Argentina. We worked with this wonderful organization called Life Argentina with Lily, just amazing woman. When I saw the students just go after the children, we went to this amazing place called Villas Miserias, misery villages or misery neighborhoods is the term they use to describe these neighborhoods, which is pretty brutal, and they're really brutal slums. They're all walled off, which is horrible. We follow Lily there, and I see the students. The first time I really saw them in action. And this is a dark, pretty rough slum. Now, it felt very safe behind Lily. She was like about as tough as you could imagine, and she had like a presence about her. It was just amazing. But just seeing the students just break off into groups, and there wasn't a whole lot of direction like, hey, go play with those kids over there. Start a soccer game over here. Do some art with those kids. Go talk to Jesus about those kids over there. I mean, just go. And I'm not exaggerating. They did. And every team has been like that. And I still find myself, even in 2019, these guys that are here, I was still shocked. These dudes. Incredible. Just go and do this, okay? And just open themselves up. Share the most intimate parts of their faith in Christ. Give of themselves. Sweat in the most hot, miserable kind of environments, but smiling the whole time. I mean, it sounds like I'm exaggerating. I'm really not. My wife's nodding. She's a no BS monitor over there. I feel like every trip has been that way, and it's really been a marvel. So yeah.
Here's a good one. Which country had the best beer?
Ooh. Hands down, and I'm going to go city, Leipzig, Germany. There was a purity to it, and we stayed in this really cool old hostel. It was an old home, actually, occupied by the SS at one point. Pretty amazing. You would have loved it. Russ Dawn actually came there and walked us through, just because of the history, the whole historical part of it. It was just really cool, redone. Right across the street was this rad, what are you saying, he says. Right across the street was this amazing liquor store, but it wasn't like anything you've seen before. It was just really well organized, which again, you might say that's German. I don't know. I don't make stereotypes. I'm German, so maybe I can say that. Very organized, but it was just beautiful. Anybody who loves beer and seeing a really well-organized, tightly packed, well-stocked, very inexpensive, amazing beer selection, come on, baby. It was awesome. So Russ, Don, and I had our fair share over there. We love to walk over each afternoon and say, what's it's going to be today? I haven't tried that one. So, yeah, that was fantastic. Cheapest beer, China. And because it was so hot and humid in China, somehow the beer tasted really good. But I know it was really crappy beer because I've had that beer before. It was like Tsingtao or something like really bad. But oh my gosh. Not only was it 25 cents for a tall boy, but it was just so crisp, and it's just what you kind of needed after a hot day. So anyway.
Other questions? So, single scariest moment.
Scariest moment. In 2012, I didn't lead the trip in 2012. I was a visiting professor. We hadn't had visiting professors yet. So I went for like super long. I went like 3 weeks in India, 2.5 weeks in India, and 3 weeks in Bolivia. Bolivia and Peru. It was a combo. And I took Jack, my little boy. He was 11 at the time. So we went down and joined the team in Bolivia. Well, we had this awesome connection. Philip Kittleson, incredible guy. He's an American guy, grew up in Bolivia. His dad was like a major leader in a city called Carnavi. And at one point, he was like held at gunpoint by the drug dealers in Carnavi. They surrounded his radio station where he was preaching the gospel. And they were telling him, stop preaching the gospel. Stop preaching against cocaine. Because they grow a lot of coca, and that's quite a big thing for cocaine and so forth. And he refused. And they ended up shooting the building up. But he and his dad, he was a very small boy at the time. His dad didn't get injured at all. And the cops ended up coming eventually. But anyway, this was the guy that was our host, right? Philip Kittleson. Amazing stories. And he grew up in this incredible place. Well, we get to La Paz, Bolivia. Highest airport in the world, something like that. I can't even begin. 12,000 feet, something like that. More than that. Anyway, it felt like there were sandbags on our shoulders. So we got out of the airport, and I'm feeling sick, and Jack's already throwing up, and it was pretty brutal to kind of get acclimated because we had left LAX and arrived and never acclimated to that altitude. Maybe it's 16,000 feet. Anyway, doesn't matter. So we get there, and Philip Kittleson says, tomorrow we're going down the death road. I was like, ooh, that sounds wholesome. And so the death road, actually a very famous road in Bolivia, and it involves this incredible descent from one of the highest points in South America to one of the very lowest points. And it's this death road that is very steep. Well, all along the death road, there are no railings. There are like 6,000 foot sheer drops. It was actually very beautiful to look at. You should look at pictures of it. It's much more fun than being there. So we get on this bus, and these are the early days of the trip. We don't quite take risks like this anymore. I remember at one point Carter was complaining about that. Why aren't we in like really dangerous buses like you guys used to do? Didn't you say something like that? I was like, okay, Carter, stand down. So here we are on this bus, and we get just to the beginning of the death road, and Philip Kittleson starts yelling at the bus driver in Spanish. Tells him to stop, pull over, and he gets the mic, and he's like, this is the death road. They all call it the death road, but my dad has always called it the road of life because this is the road we used to bring the gospel and to establish churches in Carnavi. Sweet, right? This is kind of his attitude. He's like, this has this kind of personality, right? Real like up and excited. He goes, the way we've always done it, though, is we have people on the roof of the bus who are praying. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. This road is already a disaster, right? The road at some points is so narrow, it's a 2-lane road, that you have to back up against the cliffside to allow someone to pass who's coming up. It was gnarly. If you look it up online, you'll see buses actually going over the edge. It's not funny. But so he says, we need everybody to go on the roof. So I'm thinking, no, we don't. We don't need that. But somehow the excitement got to me. I just was like, yes, I want to pray on the roof on the death road. It's a road of life, man. Let's go. So Jack, my 11-year-old, is like, Dad, we got to go on the roof and pray. I never wanted to pray so bad in my life, Dad. I was like, okay, let's go. So half the team's on the roof. We're weaving down this gnarly road. And at one point, we come upon a guy coming up at the most narrow point. So the bus stops, and I'm looking over, and there's road still, maybe from here to Erica. That's how much road there is right now. But we have to back up to create more space to allow a couple of these cars. And so when we backed up, the back end, not the wheel, but the back end of the bus is hanging over like a 6,000-foot drop. And I'm doing this. Well, that's a long way. Philip Kittleson. Hey, this bus driver's done this 1,000 times. Don't worry, they almost never crash. I was like, oh my God, let's start praying harder. Pray harder right now, go. So I'd say that I was pretty nervous there. That was a moment where I trusted Philip mostly. So we made it though.